Morning, ma'am, gents. Thank you for taking your time today and talk about my experience on Operation KUDU, along as the team that I was involved in. I will go straight into it, noting that you got 45 minutes before you got lunch. So this is a rough scope that we're going to go on with today. I'll introduce myself so you have a brief background of who I am, what I've done so far in my short military career, what Operation KUDU is, the mission context of Operation KUDU, the lessons learned under pressure, the challenges that the junior NCOs face while teaching and instructing the AFU soldiers, practical applications that you may take in the future, and then the human element of what we did over there. So who am I? I enlisted in 2012 into the Corps of Infantry. So I'm an infantier. I'm posted to 3RR. I've been full-time since then. Previous postings, 6RR, 1RTB, 3RR, and next year I'm off to RMCD as an instructor. My core background, or my job role, is DFSW, so direct fire support weapons. Think of your javelin systems, your 50 cals, your 84s, essentially hunting tanks and IFVs and stuff like that in the battlefield. My previous deployments, apart from KUDU, I was lucky enough to go on Op High Road over in Afghanistan, and then did bushfires and COVID assist as long as in 2019. I was originally not born here. I was born in El Salvador, migrated over in 93. My parents had a very good job when they were in our home country. Mum was a judge for the government, and my dad was in the Defence Force. But due to the conflict that was happening, we had to flee because of the Civil War. So my mum and dad made a decision to bring us over here, and luckily enough, they chose right and we came to Australia. And this is where I see myself now. So what is Op KUDU? So Australia's Operation KUDU is Australia's commitment to supporting the Ukraine through the provision of military training to the AFU, or the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The operation fits under Op Interflex, which is the British-led mission that I'm sure you all would have heard of. And under that, under the umbrella of Op KUDU, we are lucky enough to work with some coalition partners, mainly the Finnish, that we work alongside. Like it says, the mission, Australian soldiers' main task is to prepare AFU members for imminent combat or imminent deployment once they go back into their home countries. So our involvement is between three courses. The Section Commander or SCBC course, which I was lucky enough to be the course manager of, the Platoon Commander course, and then the Platoon Sergeant, Platoon Company Commander course that trains the platoon sergeants and warrants of the AFU. The SCBC course and the Platoon Sergeant and and the Warrant Officer course is broken down into a 6-week cycle, where the Platoon Commander course is broken up into a 3-month or a 12-week cycle, just to give you a bit of context of the time that we have to essentially train a junior NCO or a Platoon Commander or a senior NCO to go take that training back into their home country once they go back into Ukraine. Most of the time, the men and women are back in the zero line or the trench system within a day or two of returning back into Ukraine, just because they don't have the capacity like we do to be able to go to Kapuka, go to RMC, find your core or how you're going to instruct. They simply do that on the line where there's time and they're not getting shot or shelled. All right, this is a photo of one of the areas that we use over in the UK. This is the urban facility. So you can see the training areas that we have, and you will. They're outstanding. So we have every opportunity to show the men and women of the AFU how to conduct themselves and essentially how to survive when they go back into Ukraine. This is the trench system over in the UK. You can see very different to how, I'm not sure if many of you have had the experience of seeing one of our trenches, but the main difference for us is our trenches are built nice. So we'll have nice wood blocks, they'll be straight, the lines are pretty nice, and the vegetation itself is pretty good. This over here is in the UK, but is probably one of the most realistic opportunities that the men and women have when we do train the AFU to be able to utilise live in the trench for that short amount of time that we have training them. All right, I'll briefly touch on my role over on KUDU. So I was, like I said, the course manager essentially for SCBC. So I just saw what you would normally have here in Australia as a course manager, doing the timetable, making sure food, water and all that was catered for the AFUs. It was the junior NCOs, so you in the room, that did most of the training and did all the lessons, which we'll touch on later in the slide. So it entailed us pretty much being with the AFU from 7 o'clock all the way up until 2100, 2200 at times when we would do their night serials. It was long days. The boss and I try to incorporate a rest rotation. I was lucky enough, like I said, to be posted to Kapuka, so I applied what I learnt there to KUDU, where if you weren't needed or if you weren't instructing, then someone would be driving the AFU around and ensuring that they'd be at all lessons and then delivering those lessons. Had it linked to the high mission, so we fall under Op Interflex. From there, you've got the Swedes and Romanians and a few other European nations that instruct on the BIC, so the basic infantry course. So think of old school Singo, where they'll stand behind with their stick, yell at them if they're not leopard crawling correctly, and that's the way that they instruct, not how we do it. Then you got the Gurkhas, the British, and another component of the Swedes that then do the leadership courses that we focus on. So SCBC, the Platoon Commanders and Platoon Sergeants course. All right, like I said, our main job over there was to train AFU soldiers, the men and women who I'm sure you would have heard it, the full-time soldiers are no longer, or most of them, aren't fighting on the front line. It's mainly like one of the corporals said in the room, conscripts or people that volunteered to save their homeland that we are now teaching and training to essentially survive once they go back into combat. So the way we focus training, we're not teaching our doctrine or the ADF's doctrine, we're teaching NATO doctrine. So that was another thing that the boys and girls in the training team had to focus on and get stuck into before they actually deployed, and is understand how NATO does things, because it's at times very, very different to how we actually do things. So we try to focus on short, high intensity training cycles. There is, and we are bounded by the learning outcomes that we have to teach, because at the end of the course they get essentially an ROA. And some, not all, some come over for the wrong reasons, because with that piece of paper, even though they wear the rank, they don't actually get paid. However, if they have a pass mark on that piece of paper, they take that back to the higher command and then they get paid whatever wage that they get for whatever job role that they're doing. So they're big. For some of them, they are over there for the wrong reasons, because all they want is that piece of paper to say that, yes, you're competent at being able to lead a section or be a platoon sergeant or lead a platoon under a platoon commander construction. I'll touch on it now. We'll probably touch on it in the later slides. All the skills and drills that we teach, or we were teaching the AFU, most of them would be applying it within days of going back into their homeland. You'll hear it now, and I'll probably say it again. You in the room, the junior NCOs, the corporals, you are, for Army, the lowest level of command that Army has. So you have the ability to, for us infantry or for 3RF specifically, when we have 9-man sections, you lead 8 other men and women into battle, and you have to be able to tell them, go take this trench, or I need you to go something that may or may not risk their life. Your Army's lowest level of command, and that is a massive responsibility, and the boys and girls on this operation managed to get that and had that experience to be able to teach a conscript essentially how to live out in the field environment, as what we luckily get enough to do at Kapuka, at Singo, and your other trade schools and your IETs. We just didn't have that time to drill every single negative point. We just had to focus on what would be the biggest friction point on their survival once they go back. Because the last thing we want to do is turn a blind eye to, I don't know, let's say cooking at night. We've all heard it and you've had it in orders. You know that like the enemy, we also have MVGs and have high capability of being able to see things and have sensors everywhere on the battlefield. Cooking at night is a simple thing where you've been told after stand down, no more cooking. The main reason why, because you don't want to be seen by the enemy when you're living in and around the trench, right? If we would let them do that, they'll then take that back. They'll have a drone there. We'll speak about, I'm sure there'll be questions about drones. They're everywhere in Ukraine. They got, like Sir said before, the level of technology that they have is probably not being reported back down to you guys, or your understanding of what they actually can and can't do is pretty big. We're lucky enough to have drone operators come over from Ukraine to essentially do a 2-day package on anyone who was qualified to be able to fly the Black Hornet or quadcopters, and then we then incorporate that into training, which we'll get into. Like I said earlier, the responsibility of what you're actually teaching and what we're teaching was down to the junior NCOs who are on the ground, leading their sections like you would think to Kapuka, your basic schools. That is what they were doing. They'd have a 10-man, 10-woman section, and they would teach them basic skills and drills all the way for the 6 or the 3-month package. That's a photo of Ukraine. You can see what they've done. This is just basic chicken wire from your hardware stores over there in Ukraine. This is just to stop the threat of drones because they're everywhere. And for when they do get into close combat, for grenades to no longer come into the trench. So something as simple as that is what they're building. You don't have to be too fancy. All it is chicken wire with a mesh to stop or hopefully not get detected. And from there they have those little garden bars over the top to try stop any grenades if they do throw grenades once they become into contact. But you can see how deep and how tall the trench systems are. Apologies, I don't have a measurement, but you can see how well they do. We'll quickly just talk about the difference on what I call peacetime, so that gap between when we no longer were in active conflict over in Afghan to what we are in now, and slowly transition to that. So you as junior NCOs, me as a senior, and all the higher up, we have that opportunity to develop long-term our soldiers. So you have, 12 weeks, 9 weeks at Kapuka to be able to develop how you become from a civilian all the way to when you graduate, which most of the time is a massive, you see a massive gap, especially as an instructor, you'll see it. Hopefully you will get the opportunity to go to a training establishment to see that. But what you get from the start to what you finish up with is massive. But we have that time, right? And then from there, for me as infantry, we go to Singo for 3 months, and then we just learn our craft day to day. So 6 o'clock, wake up, 10 o'clock, we will finish. But we have that time to be able to either fault find, correct, and then just do repetitions of whatever issue we have to improve. Whereas over there in the Ukraine and in the UK, on more specifically KUDU, we just don't have that time to be able to focus on every single thing. So we just had to break it up into just survive. What would help us survive was what we kind of focused on. Emphasis on fundamental skills and progressive training. So we have that, think about your crawl, walk, and then run, and then your sprints. You have that time to progress as sections, as platoons, as companies, and then battle groups into doing all that. Whereas over there, they don't. They just pray that whatever level of training they've received up to the point where they're going to get into combat is enough, and then they just run with it. And I've spoken about the time that you have to be able to conduct remediation training to correct that and then hopefully improve it. All right, we'll talk about Operation KUDU specifically. So, like I said, the training cycle was very short, very compressed, and the boys and girls didn't really have the time whilst we were in country to be able to figure out what kind of doctrine they should be teaching, the learning outcomes that were specific to whatever lesson that they were getting taught. They didn't have that time, so that we expected, the boss and I, that they'd get stuck into it before we actually got into country. I've touched on it already. The focus was on essential skills that would keep the men and women of the AFU alive longer than a day of their return back into the zero line or the trench system. Unfortunately, we had less margin, or kind of no margin for error. If we saw a fault, I'd expect the junior NCOs to correct it, fix it, and then move on. What we kind of got sometimes is, I'll talk about it later, is has anyone heard of survivor bias before? You want to touch on what it is?
So because they've been through a certain conflict, for example the trenches, and they've survived it, they think that whatever they have done, that will work for that scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So the biggest thing that we found was they thought fieldcraft, they could live out in the field for extended periods of time, so they were all over it. But when we tested them, they would crumble. They didn't like being cold, they didn't like being wet, they didn't like walking for no more than 5 kilometres a day because they weren't used to it. And then, you touched on, the trench was probably the biggest friction point that we had over there, because they had that survivor bias that I've survived something that you're doing similar and I did it this way. I'm going to keep doing it this way because I've survived. However, most of the time what we found is they're very Soviet era driven. So they'll do something and they'll keep doing it. And you would have touched on it before with the conscripts and how Russia uses their conscripts, where they just send mass upon mass upon mass, hoping that either they'll run out of ammunition, they'll either leave the position, or they'll just fall and then drop arms. So we had the issue of trying to teach them how we do things. The reason why we do things is PID for them isn't a thing. They'll just see something that moves, shoot and engage, and then pray that it's not one of their own. So we had to try incorporate PID, and the reason as to why we actually PID and we don't just let off rounds for no reason. There's kind of a little bit of friction point that we came up across with them. And then we tried to shape... we were lucky enough to have officers and seniors that were from the Ukrainian army that would be essentially following us and trying to help us develop training. So it was either realistic and current. Because that was probably the biggest thing as well, that the AFU would always, before you got them, we'll go back. Before you got them, you got a report. And that report essentially gave you the demographic of where they're from, their age, their combat experience, and their unit that they're from. But obviously with that, we saw that a lot of them would lie on that report and fluff up some of the stuff. Obviously it's unverified, so whatever they said, we had to trust from the start. And during the weeks that we had with them, then we'd slowly find out what they actually end up doing. But that report helped us shape the training, because it kind of gave us a bit of insight into what was happening on the ground, what they were coming up against, and especially the drone threat that was massive over there, and it still is. We had to try shape our training, because I, before KUDU, had no training other than being able to fly a Black Hornet around on what UAS or what drones actually do. So a big part of my time over there was trying to learn the ins and outs of how to actually, make the drone threat that we had realistic for them when we came up to the full mission profiles that we end up doing for the AFU. That's a picture from Ukraine and another one from the trench. That's how it looks like real time on the ground. And this was probably about 6-7 months ago this photo was taken. Are there any questions so far? All right, some lessons under pressure and how we dealt with them. So, like I've touched, the biggest theme is us over there is essentially teaching the men and women of the AFU on how to survive longer than a day once they go back to Ukraine. Not all of them end up going back straight to the zero line or the trench system. Some have the luxury. It's all dependent on what battalion or what regiment you're from. Will depend on where in the area of Ukraine they're operating in. The AFU are passionate about Ukraine. They hate Russians and they hate anything to do with Russia. And they're extremely passionate about defending their homeland. So that kind of worked in our favour because if we could give them the why as to what we were doing and why we're doing it, it'd make the instructional component or teaching them a lot easier when it came to doing trench stuff or living out in the field. The junior NCOs had to try link every lesson with something that happened or has happened in the past in Ukraine. Obviously, that's kind of hard because you can only do so much reading while you're over there. So they had to try rip the lessons that the previous rotations had done and then remake the PowerPoints and then add relevancy and keeping up to date on what was actually happening over in Ukraine. The AFU are extremely passionate. You tell them to do something, and this is probably a big plus on the ADF as a whole, and the instructors that were over there on KUDU, because we as Australians are pretty easygoing, and so are the Ukrainians. At times, there's a bit of conflict just because of the way they are, very Soviet era run. However, unlike some of the other nations, we were able to build that initial rapport with them quite easily and get through to them because at the end of the day, we're there for the same reason, right? We're trying to help them survive and try essentially for them to survive and kill the Russians once they go back into country. Once we got that across, it was kind of easy or easier when it came to doing theory lessons or the practical side of the house. And then with that, the instructors probably had the biggest difficulty of empathizing with the AFU because they've been through a lot, and there's no other than Israel and Hamas and all that. Apart from the Ukraine, Russia, we have not been in a proper conflict. Afghan was towards the end of it was very, I wouldn't say easy, but different to how it was at the start. Ukraine, Russia is a very, very different kind of war. No one ever thought that we'd be fighting in trenches or doing anything like that again. And you have 2025, 2 European nations fighting in a trench, and that's how they're surviving. So Colonel McDermott spoke about it during his period, and you've seen it now in the strategic 2024, is how we're now developing the way we train. So what we had to do was, unlike what we've been taught, to try accelerate what we were teaching because it was important for their survival over there. We did prioritize, like the slide says, mission essential over long-term development. Unfortunately, we don't have that time to be able to develop them because they'd like to come across and tell you that they're a full-time soldier, but most of the time they're wearing either the rank of a corporal, sergeant, platoon commander, or even a OC, but they've only been in the AFU for a year. And that's how big their progression is. And they'll tell you things that they've done, things that they've seen, which you take with a grain of salt because you can't verify it. But as long as you can empathise and give them the reason as to why, it goes a long way. And it's something that the boys and girls over there on my training team end up doing. The biggest one for us as well is there was a lot of lessons that the British like to do theory-based, but they don't really work theory-based. For example, there was the initial field lesson, so setting up your hoochie, putting your pack together, putting your webbing together. That was a 40-minute slide that we had to present to the AFU. We managed to, obviously you have a bit of freedom on the way you instruct. We obviously scrapped that and started doing it more practical. And then towards the second session that we did, we found that a lot of the lessons that we should have done in the first lesson practically, we didn't. And luckily we had another rotation to be able to build that. So unfortunately for the first course, it was our guinea pig course because it's kind of hard that you're only there for 3 months. You either cycle one course or you cycle 2 courses while you're there. Luckily, now the operations it's been extended a couple of months where you can actually cycle through essentially your crawl, which is your first lesson, so your first session, then your walk, your second one, and then you're refining everything you do on your run. So that third session technically should be your best session. We try to utilise the LOs essentially that were over there helping the British, us and the Ukrainians come together to try teach them things as well. So they had every second week off, and they'd call it AFU Day, where it was meant to be a Ukrainian-led either presentation, doing or running over SOPs and TTPs, or scenarios. But what we found was some of that training wasn't getting done. So the training team I had was very, very good. They would go off, all the junior NCOs would go off their own back, quickly research something, and then within half an hour, they'd have a pretty good lesson done, and then doing that and instructing to giving it to the AFU, which is really good to see. So this is a little bit, again, in Ukraine. Another photo, again, currently in the same period as the previous one that I showed you. You can see some of the conditions that they're in. There's more the urban setting for what they're rolling in. Yep, so biggest thing is time. We just didn't have that, or we don't have that time to be able to teach them everything like we do back here in Australia. The things we prioritised was safety, weapon proficiency, and then their field craft, because essentially those 3 things we found were the ones that would keep them alive for a little bit longer. The biggest thing, or one of the biggest things we found is their weapon safety was horrendous. They would just go around, laze everyone. They'd fire off blanks because they thought it'd be funny, and they'd scare their mates, which obviously we don't do that, right? We have, there's reasons as to why we don't do that. There's obviously punishments if we do that, and then they don't. They'll just either bully themselves internally, or they'll just they'll put aside the person that does it, but giving them a reason as to why you don't do that, why you don't just go to load if you haven't been instructed or you haven't been ordered to, why you don't go to action if you haven't been ordered to. There's only one live fire range that gets done, and that's on the platoon commander course, because they're the ones that can be trusted, whereas the junior NCOs and the seniors just had blanks because they'd just do some funky stuff that would be very, very unsafe. And then that led to you guys and the boys and girls over there to upholding the standards. Kind of even me when I was a Lance Jack and a Secco, I kind of felt weird, like gripping someone up for random shit, whether it's their haircut or their blousing not done correctly, stuff like that. That it's small now, but we're lucky enough to experience it. Those small things mean something later on. It's not directly leading to your survival, but if you can trust that your soldiers will listen to you and they feel that they're empowered by you, it goes a long way when it's small things like that, because then you're not going to have to waste your time telling someone to go get a haircut or telling someone make sure your blousing is done correctly. Sounds kind of wank, however, like those little things mean stuff. Working with other nations. So I'm not sure how many in your room have had the pleasure of working with other nations, but we mainly worked with the Finns and the Gurkhas over there. And not sure if you've worked with the Finnish before, but they're very, very stubborn until you get on common ground with them, and then they open up. So one of the friction points we had was trying to come together as a training team, because we're not there just as the Australians. We're there on KUDU, which includes the Australians and the Finns. We had issues with them at the start, just because, to give you a bit of context on the Finns, they apply to go over onto Operation KUDU for them. Most of them are a reserve soldier or either an NCO or a platoon commander with less than a year of experience. But they come over there thinking that they know everything. Obviously, they should, because they're part of NATO now, but they think that they know everything that has or comes under the NATO umbrella. They think they're all over trench warfare, because they are also preparing for the future invasion of what they believe Russia may come into Finland again. So they're doing a lot of trench stuff at the moment. However, what we saw, or my experience from them, is not that. Even though we don't train in trench warfare, the way we train urban is outmatches what they bring to the table. However, because we fall under the same umbrella, we had to get them and let them instruct with us there in the background, making sure that what they were teaching was correct, and again, teaching them how to survive for the future. So there is a training cell over there that is responsible for aligning all nations' standards, whether that's lessons, their weapon craft and the field craft. However, I didn't really see them out there that much, and from what I saw was a lot of nations copying and grabbing the lessons that the boys and girls from all three courses had built, and then giving that. Obviously, it's very, very easy to do that, but it's kind of hard if you have no context on what you're teaching or what you've been ordered to instruct on, to then deliver that. So what we were seeing, it was some of the AFU from the other nations that they were wanting to come across to us and get taught by the Australians and Finns, which is a massive bonus for the men and women on OpKUDU for my rotation. Obviously, there's always going to be cultural and communication challenges. We're quite lucky that the Finns were pretty good at English, so we didn't really have that issue there with them. But we did have the interpreters have a bit of issues with them, because my English isn't the best, and obviously I wasn't born here. I had to learn English, but theirs is worse than mine. So the interpreters had a bit of issue sometimes understanding lessons that they were saying, because they'd like 24 hours, 48 hours before you deliver a lesson. They want like a run through or run sheet on what you're going to instruct. Most of the time the Finns are like, nah, screw that, and then just do it on the fly. At times it worked, at times it didn't. The interpreters over there, very, very good. So obviously they're not over there in Ukraine fighting directly for their homeland, but they're offering the ability to be able to essentially instruct, because they're another instructor for us, to be able to deliver all the lessons that we have to teach the AFU in order to survive. So that is their contribution. They are very, very good. We had no issues with any of the interpreters over there in the UK. Whoop. Questions so far? All right. Briefly touch on the some personal challenges. The first one in the comms space. So, like I said, the language differences required. Interpreters at times proved to be the most challenging part. Not for us so much, except for the start where the second point, where military terminology doesn't directly translate in Ukrainian. So, for example, action. You'd think that is a universal language and people, especially soldiers, would understand that action, but it didn't translate directly in Ukrainian. So they had to figure out a way of, when we would say load action, how to actually say that to the Ukrainians so they'd actually do that drill. Another one is leopard crawling. Didn't translate directly, so they had to find another way. And the easiest one was us demonstrating that on the ground of when we say leopard crawl, this is what we mean. And then the difference in culture and expectations that I guess we as Army hold us to compared to the other nations. So I'd say we're pretty passionate on what we're doing. We're there for the right reasons, trying to teach the AFU tricks and tips essentially on how to survive. Even though most of the training team, I'd say all the training team apart from the elements that came over from Kapuka and RMC had no instructional experience before going on KUDU. However, the way we teach is highlighted when you go on operations like this and you work with other nations. I think we're very, very good at being able to give the reason as to why we're doing stuff, and you as junior NCOs most of the time are in there on the ground doing the right thing with them. Whereas other nations, think of old school Army where you have either the senior NCO or the warrant being behind you, yelling at you, telling you to get your arse lower because it's too high and you're not leopard crawling properly. That's the way that some other nations instruct, unfortunately, and it doesn't bode well because we're used to training soldiers, right? We're used to training professional soldiers because this is our job. We're professional soldiers. Unfortunately, some other nations are used to training conscripts, and you see that with the way they instruct and interact with the AFU especially. The Finns are largely conscript army, where they will teach and talk down to the AFU and they won't allow the AFU to give back. So I was massive on a two-way street when it came to instruction because obviously we're not all SMEs on every single topic. What we did teach them was essentially our basic field craft on conducting a session attack. They do funky stuff where they don't leopard crawl, they don't fight through, they're willing to take the risk on just running everywhere, and it doesn't work. We use laser systems to show them on a computer, if you do this, this is the result you get. And we found that worked because it showed them, all right, if I actually don't take cover or don't leopard crawl or don't do the basic drill correctly, it's going to end up getting me killed and I'm out of action, right? And they hated that. You'd come across and you'd be like, no, you're dead. And they'd be like, they'd try to fight you, like, why am I dead? And then you just tell them, wait till you see the screen, you'll see why. But yeah, unfortunately the Finns at times would treat them like a conscript, and that's when the instructors had to come in and then try smooth everything out as best they could, which they did a fantastic job on. All right, the solution to that is like Colonel McDermott said before, is simplicity. Make it simple. You do something simple and you make it simplistic enough that the lowest common denominator understands what you're trying to teach or what you're trying to instruct on. You'll have the ease of being able to add some kind of complexity to that. The next one is demonstrations. Yeah, there's no point on the boys and girls over there telling them, I expect you to leprechaun at this point, or I expect you to do this, without actually showing the AFU that demonstration on how it is. And then having patience, because like I said, unfortunately they'd like to consider themselves a professional army, but they're not like us. They're not professional soldiers that have had time in service to be able to build that and have that backing and experience behind them. And then consistency, whether that's gripping them up for poor weapon handling, gripping them up for them not doing the right thing, just doing that consistently, we end up seeing results towards the end where the stuff that we were picking them up for at the start, it was gone by the end and they understood why. I've sort of touched on it. The second point, the AFU, they're very direct and think of old school Soviet. That's the way they think and that's the way they do things. It's our job over there to try break that, because essentially we're trying to push down their throats Western thinking on how to do things. So, for example, apologies, I don't know how the other corps do it, but when it comes to infantry specific, when you do your sub 2 for corporal, you get taught an orders package, you get taught how to deliver orders, you get taught how to do a conhops, and then you deliver that, right, to your section. Over there, that blew their mind, because a section commander doesn't have the direct authority to make a decision on the ground. Whereas our boss, our platoon commander, our OC, gives us an order. We then do orders, and we're expected or have that ability to be able to command and make the decision on the ground without having to be on the radio and waiting for the higher-ups to come down and tell us, yes, do this now. Whereas they are the complete opposite to us. So we had to try teaching that, and it blew their minds. Even the platoon commanders, who you think over there would have a bit of pull, they got nothing. It's mainly major equivalent driven. They're the ones that make decisions, and they just expect whoever they are under them to follow that order regardless. So what we're trying to do is try to teach them how we essentially deliver orders, or get taught at the lowest level how to deliver orders, how to write orders, how to do a CONOPS, and then when it came to the F&P part, or the full mission profile at the end, or the culminator, they were pretty good at it from where they first started. NATO versus ADF's approach, we have a very, very, very different approach to the other nations. We're lucky enough to have some excellent instructors from RMC, Kapuka, and some of the other schools come on our trip, and it kind of helped those junior NCOs that had no experience on how to instruct someone, let alone their own section, how to do things, and it was very, very useful and helpful for them. So how do they bridge the gap and maintain AFU focus on the overall mission? I've touched on it quite a bit, but their ability to get essentially on the same level and not just tell the AFU what to do all the time, but essentially make it a two-way street where we would show them something and then they'd show us how they do it, and then we essentially talk about the pros and cons of both approaches. That seemed to work, and it helped us during the field phase where previous rotations had the AFU blatantly just say no, put their weapons down and pretty much say, get us back to base, or we're not listening to anything you're saying. We're lucky that we didn't have that issue, but again, I think it's the approach that the boys and girls took on our trip that kind of bridged that issue that other rotations have had previously. That's one of our Bushmasters that got sent over to Ukraine. All right, the issue, I'll talk about my professional challenges and some of the issues I faced. That survivor bias that we spoke about at the start versus the training outcome. So we still had to meet criteria in terms of the learning outcomes that we were teaching the AFU. Some of those learning outcomes we didn't agree with, but we had to teach them because we fall under the NATO side of the house over there. But it's kind of hard at times, especially when you get soldiers from the AFU, some professional ones that have been fighting since the initial invasion in 2014. They were kind of the hardest ones, and most of those guys were from their power regiments and very, very battle-hardened individuals, and they thought, I've survived this long, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm going to keep surviving. And the biggest thing that we tried to include blue bolt or essentially BB guns into it, but we couldn't get that signed off. So what we got was laser system, and then that we then show it after each big tactical action, essentially as an AAR. We'd bring all the AFU in, we'd go through there. The funniest thing was that, so for us, for example, it showed the top kill, your accuracy, and how many rounds you fired. And that's all they cared about. All they cared about is how many people they killed, and that was it. But then you go into how accurate you were and how many rounds you fired. For example, there was a dude that ended up killing two enemies, but he had fired 170 rounds for those two dudes. And then you'd show that on the screen, and you'd hear the AFU like yell and cheer and like congratulate this dude because they essentially killed two dudes. But then we had to be like, all right, yeah, good job, you nailed two. However, you fired 170 rounds for just two individuals. They would think that resources that we would get was endless, but it wasn't. We were bound by the UK, unfortunately, and we didn't really have the endless amount of resources that we wanted, especially when it came to small arms and grenades. But they didn't care about that. They would get upset at me mainly if I didn't order enough ammunition for them or if I didn't give them enough grenades. But they kind of forgot, because at times they could be very narrow-minded as to how passionate they are. They forgot that there's another 2 courses that we're running. The other TDSUs or the training platoons are also running X amount of courses, and then you got the big courses that are run as well. So all that ammunition obviously had to get shared amongst everyone, but they didn't care. All they just wanted was ammo and grenades. It was good to see that the junior NCOs that we took over, especially from 3RR, that had no experience on how to instruct or how to deliver lessons doctrinally, I guess, how they started to where they ended up on that last session. Then being able to grip up a member of the AFU who, like I said, was very, very battle-hardened, was very good to see, and it was a invaluable experience for them to be able to do that, because I have no worry in the world that they wouldn't be able to do it now to one of our own, that you're not teaching an AFU member over there. And probably the way we managed to get around this was probably setting expectations and essentially showing the AFU we're there for the right reason. So something that the boss and I did during our initial speech to the AFU that we were grading for the SCBC course was they're massive on tobacco. So smoking, dipping, snus, they love it. So the boss and I decided to get 40 tins of snus because it's cheap over there, it wasn't expensive, and then essentially gave that to the AFU after we finished, and we said, look, we understand, because all their tobacco got taken from the customs officers once they landed in the UK, so they're kind of dirty. They had no tobacco, and they don't really make that much money, and it's kind of expensive for them to get that. So we just did that, and it was just essentially our in to show the AFU we're here for the right reasons, and we're not here to, excuse my language, but fuck you around. We're here to teach you the relevant skills so you can either take that back and teach it back in your homeland or survive a few days extra. All right, so this led to my perspective on how we did things, or our standards within ADF. And we do things very, very well without blowing our own horn. As a whole, the ability that we have to take essentially a conscript, teach them a few skills and drills, and then get them out the door within 6 or 3 months, with the ability to be able to survive longer, is very high. Me as a senior NCO on that trip, I had a few lessons I had to deliver, but it was the boys and girls from the training team, the junior NCOs, that would be leading their sections, that would be instructing their section, then fault correcting or ensuring that their sections are up to a high standard. It was them that did it. Like, I give them all the credit for that. And you see that now. You see that back in your battalions, back in your regiments. You as junior NCOs, you have so much power, whether you see it or not, to be able to instruct and help the lowest digger within your sections or your teams to be able to build. Like, there's the old way of thinking, yeah, he's just a dumb digger, is now gone, unfortunately, in 2025, and you don't have that luxury that I kind of did as a junior NCO. The boys and girls in your section, in your teams, are smart, and use that to your ability to harness that and be able to, aid you in the way you lead them and how you're going to end up teaching them. Because what I've seen lately, where secos would take their sections away and actually conduct training, is kind of gone. Noting that we don't really have that time, right? Like, we are busy with either a TS or for internal ones, a Barolga run or a capital, and you have to do all that lead up training, and it kind of gets chewed down. However, there's still always time for you to take your sections aside and teach them, because that you get them out of Singo, for example, and they're just there. They're a raw product, and it's up to you to be able to develop that and, show them what good looks like. Because there's nothing worse than having a digger in your section, him or she not really living up to the standards of what we expect of, and being an admin nightmare. But at the end of the day, you kind of have that power to be able to take that person aside and be like, hey, like, tell me what's wrong, before it starts to get a snowball effect and them going downhill. Like, we talk about retention, right? Retention's one of the biggest issues we have, but it starts at your level. You guys have the power to be able to talk to your diggers, because I or the seniors in the room could be like, all right, Corporal Wallace, or for this example, Private Wallace, tell me what your issues are. 9 times out of 10, or I'd say 10 times out of 10, they're not going to tell anyone because they're either too scared or they don't want to talk up because they're going to get bullied or told something by someone else. But you guys in the room have that power to be able to bridge that gap that we did over there in the UK between your junior soldiers and higher. So I would implore you guys to use that and do that. The standards that we try to uphold over in the UK was mainly focused on preserving their life and then ensuring that they would survive once they got back into country. Any questions so far? Noting that, do we need a... All right, practical application. So we found that training... most of the time, especially on that first session, when the translators would sometimes know the person or the people coming over to get taught a lesson. Most of the time, we found that the training that we delivered had a direct impact on their survival. And what we were finding is, in the later sessions, they don't really get a choice on who they get told to go to, but once they find out they're coming over for a leadership course, we had most people wanting to come to the courses that we were running. You got to try, make every lesson have some kind of moral responsibility for them, because there's no point you teaching them something without testing them, because the last thing that you want to do is have them tested when they go back into combat. Mistakes in training are massive consequences when it comes to the battlefield. So trying to nip everything out that you see or you think is bad, you want to try get rid of that as soon as you can. And then teaching is leadership in its purest form, right? I don't like public speaking. I'm a big fan on teaching, because I think I've had a very good career so far, and if I could give that to someone else and then they would stay in the service for as long as I have, I think that's brilliant. Like, you as junior NCOs have the ability and should be trying to develop the way you instruct or trying to develop the way you teach using your subordinates. And be humble, learn from those who have experienced what you're trying to teach. There's no point not listening to someone that has a bit more experience than you, even if you do outrank them. It's a nice thing just to be humble. So what did KUDU teach me is, you as junior NCOs, you're the front line of instruction. You're there on the ground teaching and upholding the standards that we all expect. Teaching equals leadership, and it's not just teaching solely. So I'll briefly touch on this. So I was kind of lucky that I managed to get posted to Kapuka, so I kind of use that to my advantage in the way I try to get the boys and girls on this trip prepared for what they were going to teach, knowing that most of them had no instructional experience prior. As long as you make your instructional skills clear and you're adaptable in the way you come across and you teach, you'll go miles. Like, growth mindset, flexibility and humility. All right, so what advice can I give you as corporals heading forward? So basics. It shouldn't just be a throwaway term. Master the basics. If you can master that, your subordinates will be doing that. Whether that's your weapons, your SOPs, your TTPs, or your field craft, if you can master the basics, it makes your life as an NCO so much easier. You should be able to practice, or you should be looking at practicing in the ability that you teach and you instruct at all times. For example, take your sections or your teams out and deliver section orders. It's something that we hate doing. I hate writing orders. I hate listening to orders, but it's something that I feel that at times we're not really good at. You as NCOs have your teams or have sections that you can go take out to a mud model, give a quick little set of orders and then go conduct a task. Be adaptive and have a problem-solving mindset. So it's all well and good to be all over doctrine, but doctrine is just a document or an aid to help you. To be able to, if you're adaptive and have the ability to problem-solve on the move, it's going to make your life, especially when you do get into combat, if you ever do deploy, you're not waiting for that moment, you're doing it straight away. Lead by example every chance you get. And discipline. The biggest thing that will keep your teams together. Build resilience and empathy into yourselves as well. That's just a little picture of the UAV feed of what they see of different drones in the area over in Ukraine. We'll just go to the last slide of what I learned over there during my time on KUDU. The ability that the junior NCOs have to build resilience and then pass that on on top of the pressures that get from either survivor bias or an AFU trainee directly telling you, no, I don't want to listen today, or I'm sick, I just want to stay back. The way that they managed to get their teams and their sections and come away with a product that would survive in the end was massive. Their motivation. So they're very motivated in protecting their homeland and essentially keeping the Russians away from Ukraine and trying to maintain Ukraine's sovereignty for as long as they can. Teaching is also about learning. Yeah, it's good to be able to teach someone, but you also want to be able to be humble enough that you're going to learn something off them. For me, the biggest thing I learned was that the drone TTPs that they use and how they use and conduct the drone missions over in Ukraine. So that's something I took away from them because I had no experience before it, which was good. And that was just us over there in Ukraine with the first session that we had there. Are there any final questions, Owen, that I chewed into your lunchtime? But I appreciate your time for listening to my experience and what KUDU did for me. No.
Please join me in thanking Castillo.